hand over to Robbie. So Robbie, whilst a lot has been taken away from us during this COVID isolation, something many of us have gained during this period is bad nutrition habits. Too much time on our hands has often meant it's easy to give into temptation. So we're raiding the fridge or we're smashing the Uber Eats. But as we end social distancing, there's going to be that refocus on nutrition as well. So I'll hand it over to you and give us some key advice on how we can get back on track and really help manage our nutrition in an effective way.
Absolutely. Well, thank you first for having me. I'll give you a bit of a background of who I am once I pull up my slides. But yeah, it's great to be with you and to give you some insight into some specific areas in nutrition. So just to how today will run, I'll probably speak for about 25 to 30 minutes. We will have some polls throughout the way that we just encourage you to answer, just to give me a bit of an idea as to where people's knowledge and levels are in terms of nutrition. And then if you've got any questions whatsoever, we'll certainly allow some time in between each section. But there's also the chat function, which I'm sure you're all aware of in Zoom down below. So please enter any of your questions. It doesn't necessarily have to be relevant to what I'm speaking on today. It could be any question I'd be happy to answer. So without further ado, let me just share my screen. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yeah, perfect, Robbie.
Perfect, excellent. So as I mentioned and James said, I'm an accredited practicing dietitian, sports dietitian. I'm done a little bit more studies in regards to integrative and functional medicine. So therefore I'm a bit more of a holistic and functional dietitian. I work in private practice and have done for over 10 years. And sports is a big part of my background as well, working with athletes, as I used to be an elite athlete myself. As James said, I'm also the co-founder of Health Bank. That is a business that I started for practitioners to be able to utilize as practice management and client management, but also where clients like yourself can come to a platform and browse for specific practitioners to have an appointment, whether it be face-to-face, online, or over the phone. All right, so we all hear about doing a nutrition and food audit, which is pretty relevant as we have probably got into some bad habits, as James said. So I guess the first poll would be great to know is how confident are you in managing your nutrition habits effectively? Maybe it's just how things have gone over the past few months or just in general. All right, so a couple of you have answered. We'll just wait for a few more. All right.
You never know, Robbie, if everyone's confident, we can get early doors and open a bottle of wine.
Yeah, very
much doubt it, but let's have a little look at the results.
Cool. So as you can see, somewhat 75%, and someone else needs a little bit more assistance. That's good because that makes my job easier actually in terms of education and imparting some information. So hopefully you'll be learning something tonight. All right. Oh, all right. Let me just get rid of that. So when we are talking about doing an audit and what does those specific guidelines look like, I'm going to break it down. And this is basically like a checklist. And you will receive these slides, by the way, so don't feel that you have to write anything down or take screenshots. I'm happy for you to hold on to this content. Well, when I'm educating people at a very basic level, the first thing we want to do is be able to create variety in our food choices. A lot of people, especially during these times, might just go to their staples in their pantry or their fridge and eat the same things day in, day out. So if we get used to doing that, we obviously put ourselves at risk of malnutrition and perhaps nutrient deficiencies. So it's really important to try to create variety with different foods every day. a little great summary is, a little bit of everything and not too much of any one thing is a good way at looking at an outlook on nutrition in general. So obviously there are certain food groups or certain foods that we should be consuming in moderation, and I'll certainly be going through those things. Portion control I feel, is something that people struggle with regularly, because it's something that either if it's themselves, they don't want to do food wastage, so therefore they're going to eat what's on their plate or what they've cooked in one go. Alternatively, if you live with a partner or even friends, you might be trying to consume in the same quantity if it's been served to you. So there are certain circumstances where your portions might blow out, and that can obviously lead to unfavorable outcomes when it comes to body composition. Eating whole foods, that's a no-brainer. I always tell people to try and eat as many whole foods as possible and minimize the amount of processed and manufactured type foods. Ditch the diet foods. So these relate to more things like low fat, and maybe where you see the term diet written as a nutrition claim. This is typically because these type of foods are generally higher in either sugar and added sugar to create flavor. So therefore that's going to create problems in itself. I always encourage people to cut down on refined carbohydrates. So not carbohydrates in general, that's very important. It's the refined carbs which are problematic. So it's the white breads, the white pastas and noodles, chips, packaged goods, and also alcohol as well, as we know. Avoid fad diets, and extreme diet rules. So I'm sure there are many of you out there that have either trialed certain diets because your friend or colleague has done it and they've got some fantastic results. Everyone is unique and different, which is why I take a very personalized approach to treating someone and in terms of their protocol, because we're all made up differently in terms of our genetics. So what works for someone may not work for you, and therefore we shouldn't be just abiding by specific dietary protocols of some diets. And finally, choose foods based on their nutrient content rather than their calorie content. So that's going down the whole path of consuming nutrient-dense foods rather than calorie-dense foods. So if we were to try to pick some foods that we should be trying to minimize in our diet, well, refined sugar is obviously a no-brainer. Too much of this can certainly cause inflammation within the body, and also they're just empty calories. So they're going to contribute to excess calories in your total energy or total calorie intake, and therefore lead to potential weight gain or stubborn fat loss. Certain flours that are highly processed. So of course, wholemeal or whole grain flours are good. Alternatively, gluten-free flours like almond meal, coconut flours can also have their benefits. But really, these highly processed flours lack fiber, and that's really what we're looking for in whole grain products. Some oils and fats, so not all, but it all comes down to the content of the omega-6 versus the omega-3 content. You've probably heard of these things, whereas omega-3 is very, very good and healthy for heart health, to reduce specific inflammatory markers because it is an anti-inflammatory agent, but it's the omega-6s which are actually pro-inflammatory, so will cause inflammation. And these are things like industrial oils like canola oil, sunflower oil, vegetable oils. And you can see these on the ingredients list on all product and packaged goods in the supermarket. Saturated fats as well. Obviously, this is what is the main offender for cardiovascular disease and elevated blood pressure and cholesterol, and also trans fatty acids. So this is more the commercially baked goods and fats that we find in packaged goods. And these are basically fats after they've gone through a heating process, which cause the inflammatory process. So these are really problematic for people at risk of type 2 diabetes, obesity, and also cardiovascular disease. And then triglycerides as well, obviously another marker in the blood that we can test for heart health, but this should be avoided or minimized as well. Processed and deli meats. Sadly, yes, they are delicious. However, we want to make sure that we're minimizing these because of the high sodium or salt content, but also the saturated fat content as well. Additives and preservatives, also a no-brainer. In high quantities, these can be also unfavorable to our health. And these are basically found in the ingredients list with numbers associated with them. Processed and packaged foods. So as I mentioned in the slide before, eat whole foods as much as possible and minimize these processed foods. And then, of course, the good old soft drinks, energy drinks, or those really concentrated fruit juices, because again, high content of sugar and pretty low levels of nutrients in them. So they are empty calories. Now, this is a great little table I've put together to basically show you words that are used in ingredients list to represent fats, sugars, fiber, and salt. So obviously the three things you want to be cautious of is the fat, added sugars, and the salt, whereas fiber is something is positive and you want to consume as much of as possible. So the other three columns is maybe something you should be taken into consideration the next time you're looking at your ingredients list, because this is what manufacturers can add to the product to be the same as that particular ingredient. So as you can see, for the general public, if they're looking for sugar, they might just be looking for the word sugar. But as you can see, there are many different words for different forms of sugar in a product. So just keep that in mind the next time you are looking at certain products in the supermarket. So on the other flip side, the things that we should be trying to increase in our diet that have a positive effect on health is obviously trying to consume the nutrient-dense foods. So those things that are high in antioxidants, high in vitamins, high in minerals, which are obviously your whole foods like vegetables, fruits, and whole grains and legumes, which I've basically laid out there. Antioxidant-rich foods. The reason why I promote antioxidants as much as possible, because this reduces free radical damage. Now, we all are exposed to free radicals. If you experience stress, whether it be on a daily basis or less frequent, your body will go through that inflammatory process. The same as if you're exposed to chemicals, pollutants, all of those things that are environmental and lifestyle based that are basically unavoidable, we are going to put inflammation in the body. So therefore, antioxidants is what recalibrates our body. So we should be trying to consume an antioxidant rich diet, including healthy fats. So those are the omega-3s, which are coming from predominantly fish oils, and those oily fish like salmon, sardines, anchovies, mackerel, and also swordfish. Alternatively, plant-based sources as well, such as flax seeds, chia seeds, and also something like linseeds as well, and walnuts are great. So if you are someone who doesn't like those, like fish, for example, or allergic to nuts and seeds, you may consider more of a supplement in that regard. Anti-inflammatory agents. So we know omega-3s are anti-inflammatory, but some additional ones are things like your natural spices, like turmeric is absolutely fantastic, and I encourage it where it possible. It has been proven to be a better anti-inflammatory agent for reducing cardiovascular markers compared to some statins to lower cholesterol, for example. So it can be consumed in a supplement form if you find it challenging to consume in its raw form. Herbs such as the forms like garlic and ginger are also anti-inflammatory as well. And just herbs in general are really fantastic. We should be trying to consume lean meats over fatty meats. And these are obviously things like fish. Even though they are fatty, they consume the good fats. But then the way you can think about the fat content of animal products is the more legs the animal has, the fattier it will be. So for example, two-legged animals such as chicken, turkey, kangaroo, are really going to have lean sources of meat compared to things with four legs. So just a great little cheat sheet to think about there. Raw nuts and seeds are also fantastic for protein, fiber, vitamins, minerals, and also some healthy fats in there. And then, of course, whole grains and legumes as well. And water, even though it's not a food, it's a liquid. Everyone always forgets water, so stay well hydrated. This is a nice little table I've kind of summarized and put together. And if you see that 80% of our body composition is determined by what we eat, then we should be paying attention to our nutrition. So this is a bit of a modification on your typical food pyramid. As a dietitian, you know, we are presented by general government guidelines, which I think is bollocks. I go against the grain, and I certainly manipulate this to suit my clients. And as you can see, I've really turned it around and made it smarter and more efficient for people to understand. So at the baseline there, we should be trying to consume fresh, seasonal, and local produce. Followed by good quality lean proteins, consume healthy fats, and then also some smart carbs. That may sound like a bit of a wanky industry term, but it does actually make sense. We are trying to consume carbohydrates that have a very high fiber content and that are low glycemic index or low GI. And the reason for that is so we don't cause spikes in our blood sugar levels and also spikes in our insulin, which at the end of the day can lead to stubborn fat loss. So this little pyramid is a nice little summary of what you can take away. I also generated this cool little portion control plate. So typically, again, like government guidelines, they say half your plate should be vegetables, a quarter of your plate should be protein, and so forth. I, again, have manipulated this because they neglect healthy fats. And it really bothers me because fat is very slowly digested and broken down and metabolized, meaning it's a great addition for those people who eat something and then feel hungry straight after. So we should be trying to consume like high protein foods and high healthy fat foods. But again, the portion is important. And these can really satiate us and feel us feeling fuller for longer. So as you can see, I've manipulated that to include a small amount of healthy fats. The Evo there is obviously extra virgin olive oil, and then avocados, nuts, and seeds. Some smart low GI carbs there, and then also your protein-rich lean proteins there. And of course, majority should be plant-based foods. Okay, James, do we have another poll before we jump into the shopping component at all?
Yeah, I might put a couple up actually. One now. Let's look at this one. This is a bit more general. It's more just to get a gauge on how people are feeling on, I guess, their biggest nutrition challenges, just to make sure we've got it covered, and we get a sort of sense of where people are sitting. So vote now. What are your main challenges? What do you find you struggle with the most, and probably need a bit more help with? All right, make sure you've all voted. Okay, a couple more, make sure you press the button. All right, let's have a little look. So yeah, it looks like we're looking more on the portion control side of things. That's clearly a challenge, and managing macros, and I'm sure that's probably interlinked to an extent, Robbie. So
definitely. And that's great. Yeah. We'll be touching on that in our third section of this.
Cool. I might just do one more before your next one, because it probably leads in quite nicely to what you're going to talk about with the smarter shopping side of things. Let's have a look at that one. So just coming up now. This is regarding your shopping frequency. So quick vote. How often are you going shopping? Are you someone that does it every day, on the way back from work or whatever, a couple of times a week? Are you somebody that can do that once a week option? And can anyone see the poll? Can't see it. Lauren can't see it. I'll just double check. Make sure you're on the right screen, Lauren. All right, let's have a little look. Yeah, so we're getting, some people are there a few times a week. Some people manage to get once a week. Yeah. Get one person every day. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. Let's have a look, Robbie. What are your thoughts on shopping? How we can shop smarter, make better choices, and certainly on the frequency side of things. What do you recommend?
Yeah, it's interesting because, it also comes down to the whole planning of your food choices or your menu planning. This is where a lot of people's downfall is. And if we focus more time on that, we actually save more time in our day-to-day lives, and therefore we save more time to either enjoy that with our family, friends, loved ones, or work. So it is something that a lot of people do, is that they're not sure what they're going to cook, so they go on their way home from work, and then they don't have a plan, so they go into the supermarket aimlessly, and they go, oh, what did I have last night? What did I have the night before? What do I feel like? And before you know it, you could be spending 30 to 40 minutes in the supermarket, and it's a real waste of your time. So we want to try and find smarter ways of being able to make the best of our time. So the way I recommend this is to do a bit of an audit and inventory of your pantry and fridge. Now, you might do this on a weekend before the start of the week, and then really look what you already have, because how many times have you gone to the supermarket and doubled up on things that you weren't sure if you had, and then all of a sudden you come home and you're like, oh great, that's my 10th zucchini in my crisper. So it can be really frustrating, and then that is going to lead to a lot of food wastage. So being able to know what you have first and foremost is going to save you a lot of money, time, and food wastage. Make a list and stick to it. So I'd love to know how many people make a shopping list before they go, or they just go gung-ho and try to do everything on the top of their head. So making a list can be beneficial on many grounds, in that you go in with a plan, you're in, you're out within a short amount of time, but also it makes sure that you don't deviate away from the plan. So you're not going to buy things that are not necessary, or maybe the sometimes foods that you might enjoy as a snack or a bit of a thing on the side. Don't ever go shopping hungry. That's when we make poor decisions, especially at the checkout. If the chocolate bars are there and the lollies and things like that, we might possibly choose these foods. Buy leaner cuts of meat if you're not doing so already. Read the label. So become really a good understanding of labels, predominantly the ingredients list and the nutrition information panel. Beware of hidden and added salts and sugars. So that table I gave you before will help you with that. Purchase fresh or frozen vegetables. A lot of people ask me all the time, is frozen just as good as fresh, or which is better? Frozen vegetables are usually snap frozen, so meaning that they retain their nutrient content really well. So if you're on a budget or you're struggling with fresh produce, do not worry, frozen veg can be just as good. But we always live by that whole tagline, fresh is best. But as I said, if you're struggling, there's no harm in buying frozen veg. Stick to the, sorry, that's wrong wording, parameter of the supermarket. And the reason being, if you did not, you might have a light bulb moment here. If next time you go into a supermarket, think about all the foods that are in the open of the supermarket, or on the parameters, or on the sides of the walls of the supermarket. It's usually your fresh produce right up front, and then you've got like your dairy, your meats, and all sorts. So then, and the refrigerated section, which might be your dairy and things like that. So these are more your whole foods and your food groups that you should be buying to, compared to the aisles, which are more processed manufactured foods. So the next time you do that, think of it that way. So if you're unsure, stick to the parameters, and also the straight up fresh produce. Keep hot foods hot and cold foods cold. I know that sounds silly and obvious, but if we leave the temperature to either reduce or go up too quickly, that's when bacteria can grow, and that's what can spoil food and cause issues with our gut health. And then, of course, limit takeaway and convenience foods. Seasonal buying is something I really try to promote and that I'm passionate about, because not only is it going to taste better and it's going to be fresher, but it's also going to be cheaper. So when things are normal in our lives, I do encourage going to farmers markets. A lot of people think that, oh, they're all organic or they're expensive. Absolutely not true. When you go to certain ones, you can definitely get non-organic produce, which is essentially the same as the ugly fruit section that you'll find in things like Harris Farm or Woolies. And that's purely because these are the farmers' produce that doesn't look good to then put on the shelves. So it tastes just as good. The nutritional content is exactly the same. It's just the look of them. So that can save you a lot of money where possible. And also, you're supporting primary producers. Who doesn't love that? Especially when we go back to normality. And it reduces your carbon footprint as well. We're not buying food that's traveled across the way. I don't know about you, but I love asparagus. And every time I see that it's from Mexico or Peru, I get really frustrated, because we've got great amounts of asparagus here in Australia, but of course it's going to be seasonal as well. And then of course it tastes better, and the nutritional value is going to be better as well, because it's not brought out from the freezer section in Woolies or Coles or wherever you shop. So this is a great little list that I've put together of some very generic, obviously, things that are obvious with your fruits and vegetables and things, but there might be some things that are not so obvious. And I've chosen these for a shopping list because of their nutritional content. It's whether they're either high in fiber, high in nutrients such as vitamins, minerals, and also antioxidants. So these might be a bit different to your typical shopping lists that you see online. So I'm not going to waste time going through these things, because I will give you these slides that you can then use as a bit of something to go off as well. So I finished this section by just going through the importance of the main meals throughout our day. Now, obviously, there are situations where someone might integrate intermittent fasting, and that's where you might skip a meal, which is typically the breakfast or your first meal of the day. So I am a fan of this in certain clinical situations, and it can be beneficial for achieving fat loss goals and reduce inflammation within the body. But I'm giving you this information based on just the main kind of meals throughout the day. So breakfast can play an important role with people who might need a lot of brain power in their work life, or if they're high performers. And during this meal, we typically choose a lot of cereal or whole grain based foods. So make sure that it is absolutely whole grain, high fiber, low GI. So that's going to help us feel fuller for the early morning. And then also make sure you're consuming protein with breakfast as well. Avoid the high carbohydrate options that don't have any protein there. So a lot of people might just have toast I can guarantee you, you'll feel hungry soon after, you'll feel tired or lethargic, and that's because carbs are known to help promote serotonin, our happy hormone, which can then also help us feel more relaxed. Whereas protein helps produce hormones linked to being alert. So protein, protein, protein is so important at breakfast and throughout the day. Consume fluids as well at breakfast. Oops, sorry. Consume fluids as well, because dehydration is going to lead to fatigue as well. There are some healthy food ideas there as well. Protein smoothies, eggs I love if you can consume them. They're a fantastic breakfast choice. Bircher muesli is great too, with nuts and seeds and whole grains in there. And scrambled eggs on whole grain toast as well is fantastic, with healthy fats like avocado. Lunch. So again, if you are doing intermittent fasting, this is probably the first meal you're consuming. If you're not, try not to skip lunch, because again, you're going to need the energy for the rest of your workday if you do work. So it's important not to skip. Really try to stop working and be mindful when you're eating, so you're not scoffing down your food, hunched over, which is going to lead to poor gut health. So digest your food well, chew your food well, and that will help with your digestion. Be organized the night before if you're someone who's unsure about their lunches, and make sure again it contains protein. So there are some other healthy ideas there. Salads, obviously, you can be leftovers if you want it to be. Lean meats, steamed vegetables, or lean meats and salads. And of course, whole grain sandwiches or rolls with some lean meats and veggies, of course. Dinner. So this is where we should probably try to just cull a little bit and bring it back. A lot of people, if they starve themselves during the day, they probably have a very large portion of dinner at night because they're ravenous. This leads to multiple issues, particularly with digestion, and your body has to digest food before it goes to bed. So if you're having a late dinner as well, that's really going to play havoc on your sleep hygiene. So avoid large amounts. Remember to trim meat before cooking to make it lean. Make sure you're having predominantly vegetables. And if you are struggling with sleep, don't avoid your carbohydrates, which a lot of people try to do or think that they should do to lose weight. So consume a little bit of carbs, because that's going to promote relaxation and sleepiness, as I mentioned before. So grilled or steamed lean meats can be great, with veggies, of course. Make sure vegetables are the hero of your dish, followed by lean meats and maybe some healthy fats as well. Finally, some snacks. So there are some, obviously, it's optional. You don't have to consume snacks for the day, but it can prevent overeating at your main meals through the day. Choose raw and whole foods when it comes to your snacks that are minimally processed, and make sure if they are carbohydrate based that they're low glycemic index. So portion control is the most essential one there. All right. So we did a poll just before about the macros. I don't know, James, do you have another poll that's relevant to this next bit, or do we
let's try this one. It's quite a simple one. It's basically just checking who has calculated their macro requirements in the past, to whatever level. In the gym, people are either absolutely obsessed with this, or they look at you blankly. So, or everyone has a particularly diverse and differing views on it. So let's just have a look. All right, let's wait for one more.
Yeah.
And pretty conclusive.
Excellent.
No. So this could be quite pertinent.
Yeah, and this can really be a minefield when it comes to macronutrients, micronutrients, your calorie intake. There is so many things that you need to get your head around. So hopefully I'm going to break that down for you to make it easier. And the information in this next part you're going to have, remember, so you can go away and then do these calculations to see what you should be trying to hit or target in your day-to-day activity. So before we jump into it, it is important to understand some terminology here. So when I am calculating someone's calorie needs, I'm looking at what their basal metabolic rate is. And this is essentially the amount of energy or calories your body burns at rest. So that's no exercise, no working. If you were to just lay in bed all day, this essentially is the energy your body needs to keep functioning at a high level. So it's largely determined by your lean mass. So obviously, the more muscular you are or the more lean muscle you have, the higher your metabolic rate will be. And that's why people who do have more muscle find it a lot easier to lose fat compared to those who don't. So this is why men, for example, might find it a little bit easier than women. And this is not me being sexist. This is because men in general genetically have more lean muscle than what women do. So we do want to try to, any good fat loss program will definitely contain resistance training and strength training. And James will absolutely contest to that, which is what you all guys are all doing anyway. The gold standard for measuring this is a DEXA scan. It's relatively cheap and affordable, and anyone can do this. And I get some of my clients to do this if they really want to know the exact number of calories they should be consuming, and then also the breakdown as well. So this will really calculate your requirements. And any reduction in lean mass will lower your basal metabolic rate. So I know this may overwhelm you with all these numbers, but please don't feel that way, because there are online calculators that you can use. But I myself like to do the old school manual method because I have control over it. So for women and men, it's different, as you can see. So when we are trying to calculate your BMR, we use the Harris-Benedict equation. And this is something I learned from my clinical days when I was working in hospitals. We would have to bring a calculator around with us to just manually calculate this. So this is the equation that is next best thing after the DEXA scan. But as I mentioned, there are some great online calculators that you can use so you don't have to do this manually. So once we've calculated your BMR, that's only, remember, to keep your body functioning at a level and for weight maintenance. So, sorry, I should mention, it's not taking into consideration how much activity you're doing throughout the day. So that is when we need to calculate your estimated energy requirements, or EER for short. And this is just a multiplication from your BMR and multiplying your activity factor. So as you can see, I've put down what your activity factors are probably going to be. If uncertain or unsure, I always underestimate, because we never want to go over, because then that can definitely lead to a higher estimated energy requirement, which is obviously could lead to weight gain. So typically, whoops, sorry, I'll go back. Typically, most of you, believe it or not, will probably sit around that light activity level, even if you are engaging into quite a lot of activity. Moderate might be, but unless you're an absolute elite athlete, you would definitely not hit the heavy way. Unless you're a manual laborer, then you obviously require more energy because your job is active, and then you might train on top of that. So you're just multiplying this activity factor by your basal metabolic rate. So to make things a bit easier for you, when you're trying to calculate your calorie requirements for your personal body composition goals, if you're trying to lose fat, if that's your goal, then you need to reduce your estimated energy requirement by either 10, 15, or 20%. And that sounds complicated, but it's literally, once you have that figure, you just times it by 0.1 or 0.15 or 0.2, which will give you how much you need to reduce that number by. And the reason I have put percentages there is because if you want to lose large amounts of fat in a short amount of time, you obviously will be targeting the 20%. If you want to lose gradual fat loss throughout your time frame, then you might aim for 10%. And this makes it more sustainable as well. If your goal is to gain muscle, then you actually need to be in a surplus. So we need to increase your energy requirements by the same amount. If you're maintaining, if you're happy with where you're at, maintenance, you need to match your estimated energy requirements. And finally, if you're breastfeeding, you definitely need to increase your energy requirements by approximately 500 calories. And that is because you're expending so much energy by feeding your child. So when we look at breaking down your macronutrients, again, we basically look at your carbs, protein, and fat. So we break down your goals if you're weight maintenance, or if you're trying to reduce fat, or if you're trying to gain muscle. So a majority of you probably, and James told me this in our meetings, that a majority of you might be trying to focus on reducing fat mass. So that middle one there, you can see, is you want to consume a little bit more protein. And the reason for that is because we're reducing your carbohydrate intake. And we are having a somewhat moderate to high fat intake as well at 30% of total calories. So to summarize that, if you're trying to lose fat, we basically look at more of a moderate to high protein and moderate to high fat intake with a lower carbohydrate intake. So if we're looking at protein specifically, and we're breaking this down to how many grams you should be consuming per kilogram of body mass, you can see that it's different between males and females in some cases. But a majority of you, believe it or not, will probably sit in that either early stage if you're just starting out in a training program, but most of you will probably be in a steady state, meaning that you've been training for some time. And as you can see, those protein requirements aren't actually that high, or it's probably less than what you think. So let's take me, for example. I'm a 70 kilogram male, and I've been doing strength training for years. So I probably only need to consume about 1 to 1.2 grams, which means at the lower end, I only need to hit 70 grams of protein per day. That is very, very easy to meet. So a lot of people think that they undereat their protein requirements, but in actual fact, I can guarantee in most cases, you're probably hitting your targets. So don't stress out about that. So bottom line, makes this a lot easier for you. If your goal is fat loss, make sure you hit your protein requirements and make sure you're in a calorie deficit. If your goal is muscle gain, then you need to be in a calorie surplus, and you may need to slightly increase your protein intake. And this is because higher protein intake is also going to contribute to higher calorie intake. If your goal, however, is maintenance, make sure that there is a balance with your calories and also your macros as well. So to finalize all of this, I put this into steps for you. And this is to help you build a meal and all the things you should be considering and all the things we've discussed today. So you want to be firstly picking your protein source. So make sure that the serving size is typically the size of your palm, alternatively the size of your fist, depending on what your requirements are. And again, choosing lean protein is important. And then step 2, you're going to be picking the method of how you might cook that protein. Of course, you can have it raw. So you might have raw fish, for example, like sashimi, and raw plant-based proteins. So that's fine. But if you need to cook your protein, you're going to think about how you might do it. So the healthier cooking techniques such as steaming, poaching, stir frying, or even baking. Then you're going to pick your vegetables. So again, making sure you're eating a rainbow, color, and a variety of veggies, and also choosing then step 4, the method that you will cook those veggies. Steaming is obviously the best and healthiest choice, along with stir frying, because they're cooked very quickly at a high temperature, so they're retaining a lot of nutrients. And then baking, and then try to only boil things when you have to. Then finally, adding your healthy fats as step 5. So this might be things that you make, like a healthy dressing with extra virgin olive oil or other plant-based oils like avocado oil or macadamia nut oil. Alternatively, avocados and nuts and seeds. And these are things you can obviously easily add to salads as well, and to your meal in general. So they're technically the steps I would take when trying to build a healthy meal. So finally, if you are trying to or needing further assistance, James will obviously part this on to you ongoing, but my services are here for anyone who does need it. And that's discounted, of course, to anyone here. So I'll provide you a specific discount for people who train with James. And there are some reasons why you might go and see someone like myself. And there might be more personal things that you're not ready to share with James as your trainer, but you're wanting to reach out to me and ask questions about. I'm happy for you to reach out via email as well. And there you have it. So that leads me now to any questions or commentary that we might have here.
Fantastic, Robbie. That's absolutely superb. Some superb advice there. Really useful. What to take in. So don't worry, I've recorded this. So I will send everyone a recording of the session so you can replay it as you need to. And Robbie's kindly agreed to give us the slides as well. So some particularly key slides there. I think those macro breakdowns are absolutely gold. And that calculation is going to be superb to help us along the way. So any questions, chuck them in the chat box below, just whilst you're warming up. One I had, Robbie, was about supplements. What are your thoughts on supplements? Are they needed? And I know some clients or client types, particularly struggle with things like iron, particularly females. And I think maybe all of us in the slip, slop, slap country we live in, vitamin D.
Yeah. So that's a great question. And I am obviously of the belief that supplements are called supplements for a reason, because they should only supplement a diet. So obviously I try to treat my clients through whole foods and dietary intervention first and foremost. However, there are always individual and unique circumstances. So when I am dealing with supplements, I'm obviously coming from a clinical perspective. So this might be people who are at risk of malnutrition or nutrient deficiencies, or even people who have higher requirements, such as certain states of disease or chronic conditions, and also athletes. So there are people who I will absolutely prescribe supplements for, and but they will be very personalized. So as I mentioned, I like to do a assessment of my clients, and then also, if need be, some biochemistry or blood tests and blood work to see if there are certain markers that are risk of deficiency. And then that is the best way of going, okay, well, look, your vitamin B12 is low, or your iron is low, therefore we do need to supplement. And of course, vegans and vegetarians are just known to be at risk of things like your protein, and then vitamin B12, vitamin D, iron. So yes, there will be cases where I don't even need testing, that I will say, right, you will benefit from this. Alternatively, if they do have certain health conditions, like let's take cardiovascular disease or cholesterol, for example, high cholesterol, there are certain nutrients that have been clinically proven to reduce these things. So I will then obviously add in these supplements to treat that condition. So things like fish oils, a good quality concentrated fish oil, coenzyme Q10, all of these things that only a good practitioner will assist you with in that treatment process. So yeah, I am a big fan of supplementing in my treatment, but it is individualized and not just generic. Like, I hate to say it, but sadly, a lot of PTs out there will just have their generic go-tos that they have all their clients on, and it could just end up a waste of money for them.
Don't worry, I don't sell any stuff to my guys. So. Good question here regarding what would a typical antioxidant-rich diet look like?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, let's not overcomplicate it. Let's look at all the foods where the antioxidants are found. So these are things like your fruits and vegetables, first and foremost. Anything that has color means that it has these antioxidants, these polyphenols, these phytonutrients. These are all fancy scientific terms for things that are high in these good vitamins and minerals that are going to help reduce inflammation. So again, an antioxidant rich diet is predominantly a plant-based diet, and one that is going to contain a lot of good gut health fibers. So again, plant-based foods contain fibers, whole grains, legumes, very high in fiber. So these are typically the approach I would take in an antioxidant-rich diet. Make sure you've got a lot of color. Eat the rainbow, as I say, not Skittles, but definitely vegetables and fruits.
Beautiful. Good advice. Yeah. A bit of a question on, I guess, the nutrients specifically from a vegetarian or vegan diet. Any particular tips and advice on that? And also, is there anything you can eat too much of? Things like tofu. I know things have been said on estrogen levels, particularly for males and that sort of thing. Good and bad. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so it's interesting, the research around that. Again, case dependent. If it's a healthy male with healthy hormone levels who isn't at risk of high estrogen or issues with clearing their estrogen, then I'm all for including plant-based soy into their diet if they want to, because it is an excellent protein source for vegans and vegetarians. But don't forget that women can also have estrogen dominant issues as well, which causes things like polycystic ovarian syndrome, fibroids, or even endometriosis, and even breast cancer. So yeah, there are certain cases where I would certainly watch out for these phytoestrogens, which mean essentially nutrients that act like estrogen within the body to slowly or slightly elevate them. So I am cautious in certain population groups, but in generally healthy people, tofu and even tempeh can be excellent. And yes, a very, very good source of protein for vegans and vegetarians. But when we're trying to add more protein to a vegetarian diet, legumes is also my go-to there. Even textured vegetable protein, so TVP, can be excellent. Even though it's slightly processed, it's still really great source. And then, of course, nuts and seeds as well can be another additional good little source there as well. In addition to that, also vegetarians and vegans should be conscious of iron-based foods. So green leafy vegetables is definitely my go-to. If people struggle to meet vegetable intake, then I would say even like a greens or a super greens powder can be a benefit for them, just to really increase that green leafy vegetable intake as well. And then vitamin D. very difficult to get from food in general. Typically, we get it from egg yolks and also mushrooms. If you put them out in the sun, their vitamin D status also goes up a little bit. So that's a nice little tip. But upside down. So it's those little prongs and fronds that you see under the mushroom helmet is what should be facing the sun to absorb more vitamin D. So that's a great little tip there as well.
A query on fermented foods. I know sometimes there's been a bit of a hype on this, but what are the benefits, particularly for things like gut health, and any particular recommendations or things you would maybe steer away from?
Absolutely. So I specialize in gastrointestinal health, and so this is very close to my heart. Fermented foods are fantastic and something that we should be trying to include more of if you can tolerate it. And I'll go into more detail about that in a second. Fermented foods in general act as a prebiotic. So by consuming them through food, it helps promote and help colonize the probiotics or healthy bacteria in our gut. So we all need more of that for a healthy gut microbiome. And so therefore fermented foods like kimchi, pickled goods, even doing your own pickling by just putting vegetables in vinegar can be very beneficial. Apple cider vinegar, consuming apple cider vinegar in dressings or as a shot. And then of course, sauerkraut and things like that can be really beneficial. The only time one should be reducing or eliminating fermented foods is if they suspect they have overgrowth of bacteria. These are people who have IBS or irritable bowel symptom related symptoms. So this could be bloating, gas, belching, all those things that cause discomfort in the gut. These are people who should definitely eliminate them because it's only going to add to that discomfort and those symptoms. So if you're healthy, if you've got no gut issues, definitely try to add in more fermented foods. But if you do experience gut issues, then definitely avoid them.
Another query regarding vegetarian macro intake, specifically if you're going more for your nuts and seeds and that sort of thing, which whilst being higher in good fats, the problem then being is obviously you could be increasing your calorie intake if fat has twice as many calories as carbs or proteins. Thoughts or tips on that?
Yeah, so one thing I like to say is fat intake does not equal fat, meaning fat gain. And a lot of people are a little bit worried by that because they're like, oh my goodness, he's put me on a high fat diet. Isn't that just going to lead to fat gain? Absolutely not. How I want you to think about fat gain is actually in total calories. So if you are consuming too many calories in your whole day, that will lead to fat gain. Now, of course, fat-based foods are high calorie foods, as you mentioned, James. So therefore, if you do generally just consume too much high fat foods, your calories will be blown out of budget and you'll go out of your budget. So don't be afraid to have high fat foods. However, we just need to rebalance the other macros to make sure you're sticking within your calorie budget. So yeah, if you do like your high fat foods and you like consuming them, then I would certainly make sure that you reduce either your carbohydrate, probably first and foremost, and then maybe protein if you're already hitting your targets. That's a great question.
I've got one more myself. It's regarding, is there an additional macro that we've missed? The dreaded booze. And how do we manage that, or how do we not conveniently forget it in our
Absolutely. And look, I'd be a hypocrite if I said I didn't consume alcohol, and I like to consume it for its enjoyment purposes and its social side. So I'm certainly not a dietitian who tells people to stop taking it unless there's an absolute clinical need. So consuming alcohol, look, we know behind it is empty calories at the end of the day. It is quite high in calories, depending on the type of alcohol you consume as well. For example, wine is got added sugars in there, and also champagne or sparkling goes through that whole fermentation process as well. So people who have a lot of gut issues, wine is what we call very high in FODMAPs, so it will trigger some exacerbated symptoms like your bloating and gas, belching and things like that, and it potentially diarrhea. So if people who are struggling with their gut health, we might try to minimize it. However, yeah, sure, in moderation is absolutely fine. But that does not mean you can save up your credits and then have a binge session on a weekend, because sadly that is going to play more havoc on the body and also cause more inflammation as well. So yeah, by all means, continue to consume it. Just take it into consideration of your total calories as well. The way I like to do this, rather than starving yourself and reducing your calories from food, if you know you're going to go out for a night on the booze, I would actually take the side of increase your expenditure. So maybe train extra hard at a more higher intensity to burn more calories, or train for longer. Alternatively, train twice in that day, because that way you've got a little bit of leeway and you don't feel as guilty. So if you can make those good choices for yourself, it means that you're going to you can relax a little bit more when it comes to consumption.
Beautiful, superb advice. I think we'll leave it there. I think we've exhausted everything. Some fantastic.
Oh, yeah, sorry, there's just another one. Oh, Stephen's just added on to that by saying normal alcohol versus cooked off alcohol in foods. Yeah, so as we know, if you watch MasterChef or anything else, that when they add the booze at a high heat, that alcohol dissipates, and therefore you're just left essentially with the flavor of that alcohol. So yeah, by all means, if you want to cook with alcohol, sure, brilliant. It's not going to necessarily contribute too much, because remember, it's the ethanol in alcohol which contains the calories. But again, it depends on the alcohol you're cooking with. So if you are using wine, white wine predominantly, it is still going to contain some sugars in there as well. So it will add to the calorie content in general, rather than just worrying about the alcohol. You've also got the added sugars in there to worry about as well.
Good point. Good point. All right, just before we finish, I'll just end with a final poll. This is more to gauge a bit of feedback on as and when we do our next series of webinars on the nutrition side of things. Any specific topics you'd like to hear about? Anything you think you are struggling with or would like to hear a bit more? So fill those out, have a little read through. And in the meantime, I'd just like to thank Robbie. Fantastic, Robbie. So much information through there. But as I say, don't worry, you'll get a link to the recording through on this. I'll email it through to everybody. We'll also give you a few freebies. So we'll give you a free quick start nutrition guide. So a few tips and tricks to help you get started and break down the key important things that are going to be specifically helpful for you to get you where you want to be. I've also got my Tasty and Toned recipe book. Some nice, simple, easy, quick recipes in there. Good ideas there to think about when you're going to the supermarket as well. Have a look at that checklist. Plan your trip in advance and have that in mind. Also, don't forget that if you do have specific elements, issues you want to talk through specifically with Robbie, I'll give you his details. Have a chat with him, and don't forget he's offering a 25% discount off his initial his consultation rate as well. So we can sort you out with that as well. Let's have a look what people are looking at on the lots of stuff. Certainly, I think the sort of improved energy sleep management side of things is looking like a particularly popular one. I guess the stress management could fit into that side of things as well. So
definitely. Yeah, I could definitely do that trilogy because they all go hand in hand, and they all have the same symptoms essentially in the body. So it is an important one, particularly for optimal performance as well.
Totally. Okay, everyone. Well, I'll let you have the rest of your evening back. And if you haven't eaten yet, bit of food for thought, quite literally, for you. So make some good nutrition choices. Thanks very much for your time. Appreciate that we're quite busy at the minute under the situation, but just want to thank Robbie again. Fantastic work, Robbie. Get in touch with him, as I say, and I look forward to seeing you on the next webinar or in your next training session with me. So thanks again. Have a very good evening and catch you all soon.
Take care, everyone.